but that's definitely one way to play it. Side Net, what about you?
Yeah, there's definitely a shift at the moment. I feel like the game's transitioning to, big midfields at the moment. So we saw earlier on in the season, like Ryan mentioned, that big at the back, 5-man defence. I found personally that was some of my best weeks playing 5 in defence. And if you'd asked me pre-season if I was going to be playing 5-man defence, there was no way I would have believed you. But as the guys mentioned before, there's nothing happening up forward this season. Like, no one's really outstanding. I'm looking at forward options, and it's a choice between King, Dennis, Edouard at the moment, and they're not really players that I really want to be focusing my side around. So yeah, I think at the moment that 5-man midfield is probably where the game's moving to.
Yeah, it looks like at the moment defence, midfield are the ways to go, and strikers, including Harry Kane, the Guru, potentially not been at his best, but would you concur with the previous two opinions?
I would. I think a 4-5-1, 5 at the back as well. I think Quintin on the Amateurs of Oz podcast calls it the mullet strategy, which is big at the back. Yeah, I'd agree. I think a lot of fullbacks now. You've got Trent is effectively a midfielder. Robertson is like a midfielder. Reece James is almost like going in a midfielder. So I think if you can go as big at the back as possible, get those fullbacks in, you're going to get a lot of points. So for me, yeah, strikers have underperformed. You've mentioned Harry Kane as well. So load up on the fullbacks, load up on the defence.
Yeah, I've currently got it set at a 3-4-3 at the moment, so my advice to all FPL managers out there, don't play a 3-4-3.
Yeah, don't follow your
don't follow any of my advice. You've got the experts here, not here. But no, there is more than one way to play FPL, as we all know, but this year it has been in about defence. But the third one for you, Guru, a bit of a stats man. How much should stats be considered, in your opinion, do you think?
Yeah, look, I like the eye test, so I like to watch games. For those that follow me know I'm pretty much up all night watching all the games, so I prefer to watch the games and see the players as opposed to more so the XG and and that type of thing. But you still look at things like how many assists and goals and who's sort of doing well in the golden boot race and the assist race. But for me, I'm more of an eye test man. I like to actually watch the players. See what they're doing in the game, see if they're on form and that type of thing. So that's more my preference.
Yeah, because stats can be misleading, can't they? That's the whole thing about stats. Sometimes they can read well on a page. You can have 5 XG and there's no goals, and in the end, it's what matters is the concrete stuff.
Yeah, that's it. You can get, say, I really like Rafinha. I love watching him. He's been okay in FPL this year. Lots of dribbles, lots of skills, but doesn't quite get those big scores that we all kind of expect. So yeah, stats can definitely be misleading. So definitely prefer the eye test.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, though, because it's a common thing in FPL, isn't it, with the stats and eye test. But yeah, we will move on. We'll move on to Side Net. Are you an eye test or a stats man, first of all? Let's preface.
Yeah, I'm old school like Matt. I'm eye test for sure. So it's all about watching as many games as possible, or analysis shows, highlights. That's always where I seem to make my points. I write it on my phone. That's what I look for. But generally, if it comes down to a decision between player A or player B, I will look at the stats. XG, XA is always great, but I always find personally touches in the box is what I always look at, because that gives you a real indication of where your players are. Because FPL, it's all about goals, assists, and clean sheets. And if you're attacking players in and around the box, getting plenty of touches, then that's what you want.
Yeah, it's a polarising thing. I think it splits FPL managers. I think the stats and eye tests. There's a fair few debates about it, but it is interesting to see that we've got a couple of eye test managers. Inzaghi, please tell me a stats man just to change things up.
Well, I'd love to say that, but I mean, I think living in Australia, we're kind of behind the game a little bit, because we physically, unless you're Matt, we physically can't watch all the games, right? So I've got young kids. Getting up at 5 a.m, 6 a.m. is the norm. I need my sleep. So I physically can't watch all the games, and highlights, they're misleading as well. So it's a bit of a cliche. You do need both. A couple of examples. I was picking a goalkeeper earlier on in the season. I noticed that Crystal Palace had a really good expected goals conceded. I thought, great, Guaita, you're coming in. But Crystal Palace, when you watch them play, they don't concede many big chances, but they would always concede a goal from a set piece, which is relatively low XG, and they would always find a way to concede. So I think you need to look at the stats and then contextualise the stats in the game. I think with the involvement of VAR, we also see goals and chances that are mostly legitimate go unrewarded in the stats. So the other day, Manchester United were playing Burnley, Bruno, great cross, Varane, header. Okay, there was nothing wrong with that, apart from Maguire. And he wasn't really, we can talk about that later on. It still irks me. The point I'm trying to make is that Bruno's cross, which was a great one for Varane, which resulted in the goal, that's not going to come up on the stats. VAR rules it out, it's gone. It didn't happen. So if you don't watch the games, you're going to look at the stats and think, Daniel James looks like a good buy. But you watch the games, and Daniel James is not a good buy. I love the guy, but so I think you need both. Stats are interesting when you can't watch the games, but if you go purely on stats, I think you'll end up with Adama Traore in your team.
Yeah, I was going to mention Adama. He's obviously left the Premier League for the moment, but he's another one. There's a few like that. Adama, Daniel James, you mentioned those wingers that, catch the eye of everyone and then don't do anything with their end product. There's so many we can talk about.
Yeah, can I just also add one further point, is that stats aren't the same for all players. So if Son, for example, has an XG across 4 matches of like 1.5, that's not the same as Daniel James with an XG of 1.5, because Son, as a world-class player, doesn't need the same amount of opportunities to score well. So that's why I think stats just kind of from a distance are misleading, but... Yeah, back to you.
Yeah, it is a great point you mentioned about Dan James and Son. It's like chalk and cheese, isn't it? You just can't compare them. They're not the same football. If Dan James had any end product, it'd be, a world beater. But
he'd still be at United.
Obviously, he's now at Leeds, so that just tells you everything that you need to know. The next one, again, we'll go from right to left. A quick one. It's another one pretty much on stats and pretty much on podcasts. We're all big in the podcast game, and we all have some pretty decent podcast that you should check out and we'll promote later on in the show for sure. But how much information do you take in before a game week to prepare for said game week?
I think I've taken in too much this year, to be honest. I think you can really muddy the waters, and there's some great content out there. I love FPL. I'm always looking for something to watch and listen to. But I think this year I've listened to too many, and different managers have different styles. You listen to someone like Late Riser, for example. He's all about, high upside chasing, taking hits and whatever. And then you listen to someone like FPL General, who's about being conservative. And then if you find yourself kind of adapting your strategy based on what you hear from them, you kind of find yourself somewhere in the middle. And then you lack consistency. And the best way to play FPL is to just be consistent. It doesn't matter which strategy you employ. I think it's about being consistent. And so for me, I'm trying to learn to be more selective about what I listen to. Not that I don't want to support content out there, but in terms of what I let influence my FPL decisions, I think I need to be a little bit more selective. Yeah.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. Just to move on quickly on the side, I'm going to pivot slightly. How much information do you think is too much?
Oh, can you ever not listen to enough podcasts and watch shows? Look, there's so much information out there, especially, FPL Twitter is great. That's the reason why we're all here today, a lot of us. It's sort of got this community together. But sometimes you can find yourself sort of into a bit of a rabbit hole and you're just bombarded with so much information. But I think the main part is to make the decisions yourself, stick with that, and don't rely on all the noise out there to tell you what to do. It's great to hear that. I love hearing the opinions of everyone out there, wildcards and free hits, who's doing what. But essentially, I think it has to come down to yourself, what you want to do, and that's probably the best way to get the most enjoyment out of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the Guru himself, I don't know how he's managed to go so good at FPL, because it's so hard. It must be so hard for you to find information, because you love the sound of your own voice watching our own podcast over and over. But obviously you do. So what do you reckon? Are you a podcast man, a website man, articles? How do you absorb your information?
Just watching all the games, articles. I'm not so much. There's a few podcasts I like. There's some content creators I like to watch as well and keep an eye on. But I mainly like just watching the games, reading people's Twitter articles and their posts, and kind of taking it all in that way. But I just like to play my own game and have fun with it. So I just kind of read bits of everything and try and pick the best from everyone's brains, I guess.
Yeah, I think you've got to have fun as well. There's got to be that element to it, especially if you're a bad manager like myself, who just just doesn't exist for someone like me. So you've got to have a bit of fun, but when you're a decent manager, I'm sure that also comes into it as well. Penultimate question: how much does EO or effective ownership influence your game and how you pick players? Some of the stats.
Yeah, I think it can really depend on the fixture. So, for example, in a double game week, obviously this weekend there's Bruno Fernandes, who's got the double game week, Cristiano Ronaldo. and if they're going to have a really high EO, then it probably will impact my decision a bit more, because it is that fear of missing out on points. Say for example, next week as well, game week 26, Salah's got a double game week with the Norwich and the Leeds game. Not triple captaining when his EO is going to be through the roof, especially in the top 10k. I will then take a kind of bit more of a closer eye on it. But yeah, it's really fixture dependent for me.
Yeah, and this one is to the panel, to all three of you. Can someone just give a decent description of what EO is for someone who may not be aware of what effective ownership actually is and what it entails? Just to any one of you.
Who's got a good analogy of EO?
Anyone?
Do you want to go, Pete? I'll have it.
Yeah, Pete.
So EO is basically the effective ownership. So what we're looking at is the percentage of players having those players, which at the moment, say for instance Mo Salah. So nearly all season Mo Salah's EO has been well over 100% because he's been perma captain basically since game week 1 onwards until he left for AFCON. But last week his EO was only 17% in the top 10k, which is just unheard of for a player like Mo Salah. We haven't seen that for a long time. So yeah, it generally comes down to his ownership, who's captaining him, even triple captains. So yeah, I think heading into game week 26, using Salah as the example, with those double fixtures that he's got against Norwich and Leeds, his EO is, I think we're going to probably see the highest effective ownership of Salah out there.
Yeah.
Let's add one thing. In terms of describing EO, it can be difficult, but the way I see it, it's just outcome based. If a player has less than 100% effective ownership, you can celebrate their points, right? That's great. But if a player has over 100% effective ownership, unless you captain them, their points will work against you. If a player has over 200%, unless you triple captain them, then their points work against you. So just looking at Salah, as you've said, Pete, game week 26, Leeds and Norwich, most people will triple captain him. I dare say his effective ownership will be over 200%. So unless you triple captain him, his points will work against you. So I just see it as an outcome base, because if I try and get into the nitty gritty of it, I'll lose my mind.
That's a great explanation about triple captain and captaining, but I think Ronaldo might be the one for this week with his double. So do you reckon that's one that you'll have to look at for EO and one that people have to watch?
No, I think Bruno will be higher in terms of EO. I don't have Ronaldo. I'm not going to bring him in. I won't succumb to EO. Dennis, a few weeks ago. But we'll forget about that.
Brilliant. Sometimes we make mistakes in FPL. Sometimes it can cost red cards and whatever. But we'll move across now to Elliot, who we're going to bring back in.
So we do have a question from the live comments on YouTube from Quentin Dunn, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but he's joining us virtually, and he asks, and I'll give this one to the Guru, do you think it's better to go with your gut, Guru, just so it feels easier to accept the outcome?
I always go on my gut, because I always pick based on what I see and what I watch. So yeah, Quentin, you know me, I'll go with my gut all the time, for sure.
Regarding the same question, yeah, for myself, that way you own the decision, you own the outcome. So yeah, I like going with my gut as well.
I guess going with your gut is nice. My gut's let me down a lot after Mexican food. So I think going with your gut is good, because as you've said, you can own the decision, and whatever outcome happens, then you're like, well, that's all right. But throughout the week, your gut becomes so distorted that you forget what it was at the beginning. So I try and write down at the beginning of the week what my initial plans are, and then revisit that at the end of the week to see how much it's changed.
And of course, we do thank Quentin for all his contributions through all the podcasts. We are missing him today. Obviously, Damo, partner in crime, is here in attendance, but we are missing you, Quentin. Surely for the next one, hopefully you are down. But that does wrap up the first debate. Thanks to the Guru, to Side Net, and to Inzaghi for their contributions.